Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the tragic murder of 18-year-old Kelly Bullwinkle. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. Alright, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, today's video is on a case that I actually learned about by a member of the Brat Pack named Delaney. Hi, Delaney. Thank you, Delaney. And Delaney actually has a bit of a personal connection to this case. She actually went to high school with Kelly and, knew in some ways the people who ended up murdering her. So she has a bit of a personal connection to this case. And another creator on YouTube here, Better Off Red, hi Sarah if you're watching, covered this case. And so me and Delaney were talking on Instagram about her experience, and she's like, oh yeah, another creator just did a video on it. So I went and I watched Sarah's video. And in watching Sarah's video, it stuck with me. What happened to Kelly stuck with me, and it made me want to learn everything I could, and now that I have, I'm going to tell you about it today. As I always say, I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video, after I've given you all the details, I want you to answer a question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as I go through the details, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this: do you believe that Kelly Bullwinkle's murder was a result of a prank gone wrong, or do you think it was, a premeditated murder? And what do you think of the incarceration status of those involved in her murder as of today? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the tragic murder of 18-year-old Kelly Bullwinkle. Now, I want to start this video off with a quote. This is a quote from the chief of police who, handled Kelly's case. He said of her murder, and I quote, "It's tragic that they chose to settle a dispute in a brutal way. They lured her to the canyon and obviously to her death. I have never worked on a case where one of the people actually helping police or purporting to police is, in fact, the killer." Our story today begins on October 4th, 2003, and this was in the Inland Empire near Redlands, California. There were a couple of guys who were out in an area referred to as the Ghost Town, which was part of like an old citrus grove that mostly had abandoned buildings and like a railroad track that winded through the canyon. These men were out there to shoot paintball, to like play paintball. Do you play paintball? They were out there doing the paintballing when they came upon something. They found something that nobody ever wants to find. So it was down a 28-foot embankment, and at the bottom of this there was like an old orange weathered couch. And as they got close to the couch, they noticed that there was a weird smell coming from the area. And as they got closer, they found what was later determined to be part of a decomposing foot, like sticking out of a shallow grave that was below that orange couch. Obviously, these men panicked. They took off. They ran to report what they found to police. And almost immediately, police were pretty sure they had an idea of who this was, because for a while now, the community of Redlands that was nearby had been frantically searching for an 18-year-old girl who had been missing, and these remains matched perfectly to the girl who was missing, even down to the clothes she was wearing when she was last seen. They knew right away that this was 18-year-old Kelly Bullwinkle, but what they didn't know is who would have any reason to do this to her. So Kelly Bullwinkle was born on June 5th, 1985, and she was raised by her mother, Diana. Now, I couldn't find even in an article, I couldn't find any article what her father's name was, but I know that he wasn't in the picture, that Diana and Kelly's father separated when she was just 3 years old, and Kelly was raised just by Diana, and she was an only child. Diana was in the Coast Guard, so she traveled a lot, and Kelly traveled a lot with her when she was smaller. Like, they lived everywhere. They even lived in Alaska for, I think, around 3 years, but after a bit of time, as Kelly was getting older, Diana decided that she wanted to, put down roots somewhere, have a permanent home, if not for her, at least for Kelly. And she chose to do this in a place called Redlands, California. This was an area where she had spent, not Kelly, where Diana had spent her summers, a conservative area that she really, really liked. So they went there in 1993, and they ended up moving into this Spanish-style 3-bedroom home that was close to downtown. Now, Kelly was a typical teenage girl in a lot of ways. She liked to, go to coffee shops and spend time with her friends at Del Taco. I remember when I was in high school, and we were born around the same time, me and my best friend spent so much time at Del Taco. I have no idea why that was the place to be, but it really was. And she was also unique in a lot of ways. She loved shopping at secondhand stores, and she even liked making her own clothes. She once made a dress out of like a sack that flour came in. She made a dress out of that. And later, one of her friends would say at her funeral that Kelly wanted to grow up to be a designer, but of ugly dresses. She was known as being artistic. She was known as being athletic. She had lettered for 3 years, like straight, in both track and cross country. Someone please tell me what the difference between those two things are, because I thought they were the same thing. She also played the clarinet, so she was musical, and she was just like warm and smart and witty and outgoing, and clearly, I mean, you'll see photos of her because I'm gonna be putting them on the screen. She was beautiful. Kelly loved horses. She was even nicknamed Little Kelly by her riding friends, and she performed in several equestrian competitions with her horse Banner. I guess Kelly had been riding since she was 12 years old when her grandpa gave her riding lessons as a birthday present, and she loved it. She loved all animals, but she was specifically and mostly passionate about horses. Kelly was also incredibly hardworking, responsible, self-reliant. And this could be inherently within her, but it also could be by design because, as I said, her mother was in the Coast Guard, so she was gone a lot, and she was gone for long stretches at a time. And Kelly and her mom did have a roommate. This was a lady named Laura, who was a friend of Diana's, who lived with them, but Laura was like an adult with her own life and her own job, so Kelly spent a lot of time alone. Despite this, though, despite the fact that Diana was gone a lot, her and her only child were super, super close. They talked all the time. They had a very good relationship. So though she wasn't home a lot because she had obligations, she was as present as she could be in her daughter's life, even though she wasn't physically there. At the time of her murder, Kelly was 18 years old, and she had recently graduated high school and was now enrolled at college. She was a college student at Crafton Hills College. She was hardworking, responsible. Not only was she in college, but she was also working a part-time job at Baker's. And listen, I don't think they have Baker's. Well, I know they don't have Baker's everywhere. I don't think they have them in many places, but listen, Baker's does not get the love it deserves. Baker's was one of the first fast food places that had vegetarian options years ago. It's so different now. When I was in high school, there were not many places to get a vegetarian option. It was Baker's and it was Burger King were the only two that had a veggie burger. And Baker's had an entire vegetarian section of the menu. Okay, I just need that to be known. I need Baker's to get the shout. I miss it. That's the thing, is I miss Baker's. They have a thing called the Fry-Normous, where it's literally just a 2-pound bag of french fries. And they don't have them where I live anymore. They just have them in my hometown. And in my hometown, it was a staple. And that's where she worked. Now, Kelly had gone through a bit of a rough patch right before she was killed, which we're going to get into a little bit later. But at the time she was killed, she was happy. She was hopeful. She seemed like she was moving on into the next step of her life, and things were looking up for her. And even though she loved her small town, because she did, she was ready to start making moves. She had sort of outgrown her hometown, and she wanted to go, and she wanted to finish college, and she wanted to study psychology and creative writing, because she was a great writer, and she was going to be doing this at Sonoma State in Northern California. But before that, before she got to this place of things actually looking up for her, she had been in high school, and she was really struggling to find herself, her friends, figure out who she was and who she wanted to be later, etc, etc. So when she first enrolled in East Valley High School, she was 14 years old, and she didn't really fit into any specific clique of people, which when I was in high school, I don't remember there being actual cliques, probably because I wasn't in one. Because when I tell you that I was an outsider, it is insane. I really was just I had a friend. It was ridiculous. But in Kelly's school, by all accounts, there were actual cliques of people, the skaters and the goths and the punks and the blah, blah, blah. There were actual cliques. And Kelly didn't seem to fit into any of these specifically. She didn't check any of the boxes. Any of all the boxes for one particular group of people. Yes, she was quiet, she was soulful, she was a writer, and she just had not found her people yet. But then she seemed to really feel like she found her place during her sophomore year, and that's when she became friends with a girl named Kinsey. Now, Kinsey was popular, she was well liked by everyone, but she had her own little group, her little trio of people who were her core. They were the core four. they were core. There were 3 of them until Kelly was there. Once Kelly was there, they were a core 4. But prior to that, it was just her and 2 of her friends. They were 3 little goth kids, and they like to hang out and do goth kid things. And generally speaking, I'm like, goths are cool as hell, nice people. But these 3 particular goths, kind of dickheads. Well, real dickheads. So these 3 were Kinsey Nordman, Damian Guerrero, and Damian's girlfriend. This was Elodie Romero. Kinsey was popular, outspoken, and confident. She was a young activist who founded a gay and lesbian club at her high school because she herself was a little bit more fluid with her sexuality, dating whomever she wanted and participating in Long Beach's gay pride parade. And she was really into animal rights. She even staged a protest on campus against eating meat. Now, I don't know what the fuck happened with Kinsey, because it sounds like at some point she was like a pretty okay person. She sounds like people I did know then. She sounds like people I do know now, at least who she was before. But as time went on, she started to change. She started to get darker. She started to get more just like kind of scary. I guess at one point her mom overheard her on a phone call with like her little boyfriend that she had at the time. And her and this guy were talking about, it's ridiculous. So imagine being her mother, first off, when I'm telling you this. She's listening on the phone, and she hears her own daughter and this guy talking about how funny it would be if she, Kinsey's mother, got cancer, and then they took her medication and hid it from her so that she would die of cancer. Okay? And they joke about how great it would be if Kinsey's dad killed himself. To which I'm like, who the fuck has this type of conversation? Who was this guy that was okay with having this conversation? Which, by the way, his name was Marco, and he went on to get arrested for statutory rape, so clearly he's a total fucking loser too. And as for Kinsey, she was clearly going through something. There was something upstairs that wasn't quite working right, because later, after all of this happens, they go through her journals, and they find a passage in her journal where she wrote, quote, "I'm a very depressed person. I have no respect whatsoever for human life and believe I could be quite capable of taking someone's life." And it's just so wild because she just wasn't always like this. It was such a quick turnaround. Like, okay, for example, to show how much she changed so quickly, in 2002 when she graduated, she was voted like most changed by her, student body. And they even, to illustrate this, took 2 photos of her and put them like side by side, and were like, boy, oh boy, look how much this bitch has changed. And one of her fellow youths said of this, quote, "She went from a surfer chick to a goth. She wore conga shells and was going out with a guy in track. A few months later, she looked like something out of The Crow. It was a big turnaround." Now, Kinsey's best friend, her BFF, was Damian. Damian lived in an upper-class suburb in a nice 2-story home in Highland, which is near Redlands, and he lived with his mom, his stepdad, and his brother. His father, I guess, was still alive and was a firefighter in LA, but I don't know how involved he was in his son's life. Now, Damian was seen as being dark and intelligent. He liked philosophers and Quentin Tarantino movies, and he was admired by his fellow goths. Damian was like King Goth with his black clothes and his white contacts so he could look like Marilyn Manson, who is a dick. And he wore all the rings, and he collected knives, and he was interested in body piercing. And under his high school yearbook photo, he wrote, quote, "He who makes a beast of himself loses the pain of being a man." Now, as cool and popular as Damian was in school with all the, goth kids and him being like King Goth, whatever, he was kind of a loner outside of school. He kind of stuck to himself. The only person he really spent much time with, or the only people he spent much time with, was his BFF, best friend forever, and / soulmate, Kinsey. Like, these 2 had a very weird dynamic considering they weren't dating. They legitimately considered each other to be soulmates. They thought that's who they were to each other. And like, for example, Kinsey went out and bought the 2 of them matching snake rings for Christmas. And that's because these rings looked just like the rings that Mickey and Mallory wore in Natural Born Killers, which if you haven't seen Natural Born Killers, I will say, and this might be controversial, it doesn't hold up. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I think Quentin Tarantino himself has even ashamed to be connected with that movie, if I remember correctly on things that I've read. And I know that that's a hot take. I rewatched it recently. I thought I loved it. Turns out, not as much as I did before. But anyway, Mickey and Mallory, which is the 2 characters in Natural Born Killers, are soulmates that go on a murder spree. And they wore these snake rings when they got married. So Kinsey got these rings for her and Damian that looked just like those rings. And it wasn't just Natural Born Killers. They like bonded over movies in general. They liked A Clockwork Orange. They really liked Reservoir Dogs, which I fucking love Reservoir Dogs. I really like Quentin Tarantino just in general. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, one might say, but their favorite was by far Natural Born Killers. Like, Kinsey even had the poster in her room, and she had a rabbit and a parrot, and she named them Mickey and Mallory. So Kinsey and Damien loved that movie, had a weird connection to each other. One of Kinsey's ex-girlfriends even said, like, Damien was her world when he was around. She was fully focused on him, and she would do anything for him and follow him anywhere. Anyways, as I was saying, Damien only really hung out with Kinsey and his girlfriend, Elodie Romero. These were the only two people that he really spent time with outside of school. And as far as Elodie, I know I went into the backstory of Damien and Kinsey a lot. The only things that people really say about Elodie that I could find is that, one, she was kind of intimidating. She had like a look to her that was a little bit intimidating. You might not want to go up and talk to her. And also she had like a great sense of fashion. And those are like the only two things people remember about her, which I'm like, I mean, of all things, those are things to be remembered for, I guess, right? I'd love for people to be like, she dressed great. No one says that about me. So these are the three people that Kelly ends up being friends with. And out of the three, she was closest in an emotional way, I guess you could say, with Kinsey. The two were described as being best friends. Kelly, had a natural talent for writing. When she was a junior, she received an honorable mention award for an essay on the dangers of drugs. And she shared a love of writing with Kinsey, which is part of how they became such good friends. Kinsey had actually won an essay contest on organ donation about a friend of hers who had died when she was little. And this essay had actually given her the opportunity to meet Carl Lewis, who was an Olympic gold medal winner. So big things they're doing. They're both great writers, and this was something that they could bond over. Now, out of the three, the person that Kelly was the least close with was actually Elodie. And this is probably because Kelly had a bit of a crush on Elodie's boyfriend, Damien. Apparently everybody had a crush on Damien. Apparently he was like the hot alt guy. I remember this guy in my school. I'm sorry, I can't help but see the parallels in this because we are so close in age. And like when I was in high school, I was a little scene kid, so I remember this feeling. But there was that one hot guy, and I guess Damien was that one hot guy, and everybody was all about him. And Damien knew Kelly was all about him, and he definitely played into that a little bit. I mean, more than a little bit, quite frankly. But not publicly, right? Publicly, he was cold, he was distant, he was a little bit of a dick to her. But then the two had a little bit of a secret friendship. When I tell you that a guy, I'm going to stop. They had a secret friendship, okay, and they would spend time together. And when it was just the two of them, he was very sweet, he was very attentive, he was very caring, made her feel like, she was the most important person in his world. And it was speculated and then later confirmed by Damien that during an on again, off again period with Elodie, because, high school, him and Kelly hooked up a little bit. Like, I don't think they went all the way, but they went some places. And Kelly was super, super into him, cared about him a lot, but he didn't want to be in a relationship with her. He wanted to continue having his relationship with Ellen. He just wanted to have his cake and eat it too. Which, by the way, I remember I asked, in a video a while back what that meant, because that saying literally makes no sense to me. And somebody in the comment section enlightened me a bit. And what they said is that it means having your cake look pristine and nice and untouched, but also ripping into it and enjoying it as much as you want. So the more you know. So Kelly, Damien, they hook up a couple of times, but it doesn't last long. And Kelly is pretty devastated. She was very, very, very into him, right away. And even Laura, the friend of Diana who lived with Kelly and Diana, she said that Kelly was super, super into him and even thought that this guy was her soulmate. Everyone seemed to think that Damien was their soulmate. And a friend of Kelly's, I believe her name was Rachel, she thought it was so weird when she finally found out that Kelly and Damien had a bit of a thing. I guess Kelly hid it from her a little bit because she knew that her friend wouldn't approve of it, because his friend saw Damien as just a mean, arrogant, and cruel guy, and she just knew that Kelly could do so much better, so she was surprised to see that she was so sprung on him. And it's just sad because it really does seem that Kelly thought that she loved Damien, especially by her diary entries and things like that. She wrote about how much she loved him, and she wrote, because we know that they had been intimate in some ways, and I'm not going to get into the specifics, they're out there, I'm not going to get into it because it's icky to talk about, but she wanted him to be the one who her first big one, because she hadn't done that yet, and he just treated her so poorly to save face with his girlfriend, and that's just really sad. Now, as I said, Elodie didn't like Kelly, and it seemed like this was probably because she could sense that Kelly had a little bit of a crush on Damien, because Kelly and Damien had actually kept the fact that they had been together during an off period hush hush. They did not tell Elodie about this. That was until shortly before the murder, because shortly before the murder, Kelly actually reached out to Elodie over instant messenger, which, oh my God, can you remember AIM? Do you remember AIM? I miss AIM. But anyways, she reaches out to her on AIM and she tells her, like, listen, I just think you should know that during an off period, me and Damien did hang out a couple times and some stuff happened. And Elodie responded, like, you better, you know, stay away, you better watch out, he is mine, and I would really hate if something bad happened. So around this time, Kelly is really going through it. It's a really rough time for her. Her heart's broken. She, like, loves this guy who wants nothing to do with her and who is just mean to her. And then on top of that, Kinsey, who's supposed to be her best friend, her closest friend, is being a little shithead. You know what I mean? She's got really, like, mean girl, frenemy vibes, and she would be, like, nice to Kelly's face, but then talk shit behind her back and try to play both sides. And whenever she was around Damien and Elodie, she would be mean to Kelly. It was just one of those really tense and awkward situations. Damien and Elodie were just like, man, I wish this girl would disappear. I wish she would just get out of here, because we're trying to be back together and she's just always around. And they were thinking that she was, like, obsessed and, like, couldn't get over it. But in reality, Damien was kind of leading her on still. And in one instance, I guess, like, Damien and Elodie had been at a Denny's and Kelly comes up and starts, like, fighting with him and, like, raising her voice. So he takes her outside and he's like, listen, like, I am with Elodie. You've got to just let this go. And she left just totally heartbroken. So she, you know, is feeling pretty confused and alone and isolated at a time where you can already feel pretty depressed and alone and isolated. And one of Kelly's friends, this was a girl named Megan, said that Kelly had even talked about being depressed and about wanting to, like, you know, take her own life. And when she would ask her, like, what was wrong, like, what was going on, she just said that she was having issues with her friends, but she wouldn't elaborate. So she's feeling alone, and she is actually physically alone, because at this time her mom had been gone, like, a long time. Remember, she works in the Coast Guard. She had been gone for, like, during Kelly's senior year, her mom had been gone for, like, half the year on a ship in Central America. So she is physically alone. And even though she talks to her mom often, right, they talk on the phone, they email, things like that, her mom doesn't really know what's going on back home because she's not there to see it. But she had a lot to look forward to, right? She went to prom. 2 weeks later, she graduated. She enrolled in college as a freshman, and she really seemed to be hoping that things were going to turn around. She seemed ready to move on with her life, to make new friends. She even wrote about this in her live journal. You guys remember live journal? She wrote about this in her live journal where she said, quote, "Now it is time for me to move on from those things and those horrible people that I somehow was friends with and go find my real friends. The ones that I didn't listen to when they tried to steer me in the right direction." So Kelly was doing better. Things were going better, and by all accounts, she was super happy and super chatty while she worked a shift at Baker's on September 11th. And this was a shift that she wasn't even supposed to work. She wasn't scheduled, but she picked up a shift for a coworker just to be helpful. And even though she was at work on a day she didn't have to be, she was still said to be in a good mood. She worked. She was supposed to get off work at like 4, and so she clocked out at about 4:20. And it seems, by all accounts, that she had sort of double booked her evening. So during her shift, Kinsey and Kinsey's boyfriend at the time, this was a guy named Peter, they had actually came into the Bakers, and, you know, Kinsey talked to Kelly, and they made plans to go on a hike after work. But then there were some other friends that came forward that said that they had plans to hang out with her after work as well. And it turns out that she, you know, it was reported that she didn't end up going to either of these things because she clocked out of work, she left, and she wasn't seen again. Now, these friends, not Kinsey, but the other friends that she was supposed to hang out with, definitely thought it was weird when she didn't show up to hang out with them. So they went to Baker's and they saw that her car wasn't there. They went to her house and they saw her car wasn't there. And they definitely thought it was weird, but they didn't think it was, like, you know, super weird until they realized that she also wasn't getting on AIM. And everybody was always on AIM. If you weren't there and you were walking away from your computer even, you stayed logged in, you just put an away message. And she just wasn't on at all. Meanwhile, the day after Kelly disappears, Kinsey contacts another one of their friends. And she's like, hey, can you come get me? Let's go do a drive-by because Kelly and me were supposed to hang out. We're supposed to go hiking. She never showed up and she's not answering any of my calls. So they go. They drive by the house. Her car isn't there. There's not much they can do. So they go back. And Kinsey ends up calling and leaving a voicemail. No, not a voicemail because of the time period. She calls and leaves a message on the answering machine. And she's like, hey, what's going on? Do you want to do something later? Do you want to get together? But of course, she never gets a response. So at this point, a couple of people are now noticing that Kelly is MIA, and of these people who notice this is her boss at Baker's, because she misses 2 shifts. And after missing 2 shifts, and her boss knowing like Kelly's so dependable, so reliable, this doesn't make sense for her to no call, no show for 2 shifts. So this manager calls and starts leaving voicemails on her answering machine, like, what's going on? Where are you? What is the dealio? That's a Mean Girls reference, I think. Now, the problem was nobody was at the home to receive these messages. Kelly is missing. Her mother is on a boat somewhere, and Laura, the roommate, was gone. She had been gone for 5 days visiting family. So Laura comes home from Northern California, and she comes home to see the place in quite a state. The porch light is on. There are newspapers that haven't been brought in, and Kelly had a bunch of animals that were just like clearly uncared for. She had 4 cats and a fish that were unfed. She had an Australian shepherd named Blaze who was unfed, and also this dog had diabetes and had to have insulin shots twice a day, and this hadn't been done. Plus, there's all those messages on the answering machine like, Kelly, where are you? Kelly, where are you? And all of this looks wrong, but the one thing that was really sticking out to Laura was the state of the animals, because Kelly loved her animals and would never just abandon them and leave them like that. So with that, Laura rushes the 5 miles to the police station, and Kelly is officially reported missing on September 15th. Laura does what she can, gives the officer, the police, all the information she can based on what she knows. She tells them about the state of the house, the state of the animals. She also tells them that Kelly had been sort of, hanging out with some new friends, and that she had sort of been dabbling here and there in drugs, because I guess her and Kinsey would, do a little this, a little that together. And she did have to mention that, Kelly did have a little problem with depression, and so police jotted all of that down. And of course, because of this, and because of everything I said, their first thought was that she was probably a runaway. Now, not only did Laura have to call the police and report her missing, but she also had to call Diana, Kelly's mother, and tell her, like, your daughter is missing. And I cannot imagine making or receiving that call. It sounds awful. But of course, Diana, as soon as she learned that her daughter was missing, she rushed home. She actually met with the news pretty immediately and had a press conference so that she could, get more attention to Kelly's case. And she didn't feel like it was being taken seriously enough because they were thinking that she was a runaway. And Diana said she knew immediately that her daughter was not a runaway. She knew that was bullshit right from day one. She said that her daughter would not do that. She was not the type. She would come home. And she said specifically of this, quote, she had pets to take care of, classes to take, and she had to be back at work. This was not like her. She was frustrated. She said that she believed that the disappearance of her only child wasn't being treated as urgently as it should be from the police and the media, because, Kelly was an adult. But Diana was like, she's like barely an adult. She just turned 18. She's just a kid. And she said, like, the police trying to rule out that it wasn't a runaway was just a waste of time. And then she added, like, when your kid's missing, nothing will ever be fast enough. But, police had to rule it out. They seemed to be under the assumption that she had either just ran away, or after going through her room and finding a pocket knife and some, writings about being depressed, they thought that maybe she just ran off and took her own life. But then they found her car abandoned. Her car, a blue 1992 Mazda Protege, which she had actually worked really hard to pay for half of. You know how parents do that, like, I'll pay for half, you pay for half. She had worked hard, saved her half, bought this car. Well, this car was found abandoned at Ontario Mills, which, if you guys are like local, you guys remember Ontario Mills? Ontario Mills was like the mall. I grew up not far from here, by the way. I think I mentioned that. I don't know if I mentioned this. I'm not like local, but Ontario Mills was like the big mall. Like, it was about an hour, 30 to 45 minutes, 30 to an hour, depending on traffic, from where I grew up. And that was like the mall. I remember the first time I walked in there, I was like, this place is huge. But really, my mall was just like a tiny little dinky thing is what it really was. But that's where her car was abandoned, was this biggish mall. I can only imagine that her friends and family were hoping that this car would lead to something, that there'd be some kind of, evidence there that would point them in some direction, but there wasn't. It was just the car there and no sign of Kelly. So for days, for weeks, her family, her friends, they held out hope and just were trying to keep their spirits up and hope that she'd come back. But they were also losing steam because they knew that if she was able to come back, she would have. So the fact that she wasn't meant that this probably wasn't going to have a positive outcome. But despite that, they did what they could. They did their, met with the media, did their press conferences. And in one of these, this one broke my heart. In one of these press conferences, press conferences, her mother said to her daughter's possible abductor, and I quote, "Anybody who has Kelly, please send her home. Don't hurt her. She's a great kid." They put up posters and searches were still being conducted with so many volunteers looking. People were even looking on horseback. The family even met with the Polly Klaas Foundation and Polly Klaas's mother specifically to get help for a missing Kelly. Apparently Kelly's family actually helped search for Polly Klaas when she went missing 10 years earlier, and then went to Polly's memorial service now that Kelly was missing, driving up from Southern California for the event because she just felt so affected. And now they're looking for Kelly, and they're just trying so hard to hold on to hope. But sadly, it would all come to a head weeks later when on October 4th, 2003, Kelly's body was discovered near those orange groves. When she was recovered, it was pretty clear to police that this was Kelly, even though she was pretty heavily decomposed this time because she was still wearing the clothes she had last been seen in, which was a tank top that she'd been wearing under her work shirt, a camo jacket, and jeans. Also discovered at the scene was a broken cell phone, a green canvas bag, a shovel handle, rubber and leather gloves, and a bullet casing from a 25 caliber pistol. Now, initially it was reported that a body had been found, but it wasn't reported that this was in fact Kelly. It was just a body, of a female had been found. But even before it was determined to be Kelly, Diana spoke to the media and simply told them that she was devastated. Now, the body was confirmed to be that of Kelly by dental records during her autopsy. And also during the autopsy, it was determined that Kelly's cause of death was that she had been shot to death. She had actually been shot 2 times. The first shot had been non-fatal. It had grazed the top left of her head. And the second shot, which was the shot that killed her, entered the right side of the back of her. Now, Kelly's murder shocked the small town of Redlands. The mayor even came out and offered a $10,000 reward for any information that would lead to an arrest and a conviction of those responsible. And this was just not a thing that happened here. It made no sense. Okay, the year before Kelly was killed, the year before she was murdered in 2002, there were 0 murders in Redlands. 0. Nobody was murdered. And then the year that Kelly was killed in 2003, there was only 1 murder. Her murder. So it was such a rare thing for kids to be killed in Redlands that when a kid went missing, murder was the last thing that anybody expected. And now that's exactly what was happening. Her funeral was huge. More than 400 people were in attendance. Lots of people came out. There were big photos of Kelly and a slideshow of her photos, and her friends, man, they were heartbroken. Especially Kinsey and Damien, who were hysterical. They were reported to be bawling their eyes out. And then it's so sad, but after her funeral, Kelly's mom started taking purple flowers to her grave at least once a week. And then when Diana was gone, because she was, working at the Coast Guard, for the Coast Guard, she was in the Coast Guard, so she was gone a lot. She had a florist who would take flowers each week to Kelly's grave when she couldn't be there. And the florist did this for a long time until eventually, after 26 years of service, Diana was discharged, or she left the Coast Guard. So now that they've found Kelly's body, they have to start treating this as a homicide, and they start investigating Kelly's murder. Who would want to kill this perfectly happy 18-year-old girl? It didn't make any sense. So they start, going to her house and taking things. And one of the things they take is her computer. And from her computer, they get their first, sort of big piece of evidence. They get their first clue, because in her computer, they're also getting all of her IMs, right? And of these IMs is the one from Elodie where she threatens Kelly. Now, apparently it wasn't just the IMs that kind of led police to think that Elodie could be involved, because I'm going to say apparently a lot. Apparently, I've never been on live television before. Apparently, there were also other issues with Elodie, as we've already discussed. And one of these issues that police learned about, one of these things that became, well known, it became known, people knew it, I knew it, now you're going to know it, is that they had a little bit of a spat at prom. It was a little weird. So basically what happened is Kelly went to prom, and she was said to be a vision in a knee-length red dress that matched her red hair that she had dyed to match her idol, Tori Amos. So she goes to the prom, Kelly, and she actually goes with Kinsey because frenemies, I guess. I don't know why she was hanging out with these people, but they all went together. So they all went together. Damien and Elodie went together because boyfriend and girlfriend, and Kinsey and Kelly went together, and they were each other's dates. And by all accounts, they were getting along fine. They were laughing. They were dancing with each other. They were even kissing each other. And I don't think they were actually into each other. I think they were doing this more for shock value because people did that back then for some reason. But that is, what's happening so far. Basically what happened is during the prom, Kinsey tried to get Damien to do cocaine with her and Kelly because they were, having a little fun at the prom, you know what I mean? And Damien said no because of Elodie, and a fight broke out. And apparently the fight ended up being between Elodie and Kelly, even though they weren't part of the initial conversation. I think it's probably because there was already a bit of tension there, right? So they start fighting. Elodie calls Kelly a poser because Kelly got the same shoes as Elodie from Hot Topic, which literally... this whole thing is so like triggering for me. So she's a poser, and then Kelly calls Elodie a bitch, and just a little fight. And it wasn't even that noteworthy until now. So Elodie's brought in for questioning, and she's super upset. She's really like emotional, and she tells them like, oh my God, I would never do this. Like, I cared about Kelly despite threatening her. I did care about her, and I would never do this. It was just all talk. And they definitely suspected her, right? Because she was one of the people they felt had the most reason to not want Kelly around because, she had hooked up with her boyfriend. But she ended up being ruled out by her alibi, so police had to move on. Now, in the early days of the murder investigation, police were interviewing a ton of people. They interviewed like 200 different witnesses, and they were following various leads. Some of the leads that were actually coming in from some of Kelly's friends. Kinsey was really helping police as much as she could because, they had been best friends. And she told police that she thought that this could be drug related because, Kelly did dabble here and there in, weed and coke. And Kinsey said that the people that Kelly would go to get said drugs were a little bit sketchy to her. She didn't really trust these particular people. And she said that she didn't think that Kelly would have gone to the area that she was found willingly because this was a place that she was actually scared of. So Kinsey, thought the only way Kelly would end up going out there was if she was getting something pretty important to her. So she thought drugs could be what got her to go out to that location. So Kinsey tells police of two people that police should be looking into specifically. And apparently there was a rumor going around that one of these two guys had robbed and killed Kelly. And one of these two was actually the cousin of Kelly's coworker. Yeah, the cousin of Kelly's coworker. And this person had admitted to their cousin that they had killed Kelly because they robbed her because they believed that she had a lot of money because at one of their transactions previously, she had bought $100 worth of coke, and for a teenager, that was like a lot to buy at one time. And they knew she lived in a nice house, so they robbed her and killed her because they thought that she had a lot of money. So as I'm sure you can imagine, police honed in on these two dudes, and one of them they were able to take into custody for unrelated auto theft charges. I'm not sure, and I don't really know what happened with the other guy, but police are looking into these two guys. They go to their homes and places they were known to be at often, and they found a lot of stuff that made police go oh, I think we're onto something here, because they go into this house, one of these houses, and they find a bloody shirt, bloody pants. They find a section of the carpet that had a bunch of blood on it that they end up cutting out to take as evidence. But the most damning thing that they found that really made police feel like this is where they needed to be is in one of the homes, or it might have been in two of the homes where these guys were known to be, there were newspaper clippings, dude, cutouts of Kelly's missing reports, the murder reports, a bunch of newspaper clippings about Kelly's disappearance and murder were found in the homes these guys were at, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, didn't look good at all. It really seemed like these were the guys. But then police got a call that would completely change the direction of their investigation. And surprisingly enough, these two guys ended up being ruled out. I know. I was like, what? The newspaper clippings? What the fuck? But they ended up being ruled out, which is so weird because one of those guys even told somebody that they had done it. And why would you confess to murdering somebody when you didn't do it? I don't know. The police chief even came out and spoke of this saying, quote, "It's just the epitome of stupidity, but it's not a crime." So the call came in from a friend of Kelly's. And this person, his name was Scott, was not only a friend of Kelly's, but he was also Kinsey's cousin. Okay. So Scott calls police and is like, listen, one of Kelly's friends has a gun. I saw a gun in the glove box, a little silver handgun, in the glove box of Damien's car. So this is obviously interesting to police, not just because, Damien was a friend of Kelly's, which would already be whoa, a friend of Kelly's who she had a relationship with, that there was some weirdness with, is said to have a gun, but he's also Elodie's boyfriend, and they're already looking at Elodie. So they're like, this is something that we need to look into. So they bring Damien in for questioning, and they're like, where were you on the night that Kelly disappeared. And he did have an alibi. He told police that he had actually been with Kinsey. Him and Kinsey had spent some time together, like at the mall and at a movie. And after that, I think him and Kinsey split up at like 11 p.m. And then he went to Elodie's house, and he was there for a couple of hours as well. Next, police ask Damien if he has a gun. And at first, he denies having a gun until police are like, well, here's the thing. We kind of already know that you have one. We've already been told that you have one. So maybe don't fucking lie to us. And that's when he was like, okay, I did have a gun. My brother bought me a gun. Apparently Damien's older brother? Yeah. Bought Damien a gun because he knew Damien was into knives and swords and shit and was like, I have a gun. Why shouldn't Damien have a gun? So he says his brother bought him a gun from a guy named Josh who lived in Ukaipa, and his brother gave him the gun. And at first he thought it was cool. He was like, look at this. Pow, pow, I have a gun. But then he was starting to feel a little weird about it. He was starting to feel unsafe. So he decided to just throw it in a gutter, which isn't weird at all. And this gun was never recovered, by the way. So Damien's not telling police, where this gun could be, anything believable, because that's the most ridiculous story ever, to throw it in a gutter. How often are people throwing guns in gutters in real life? I don't know. So police are like, without a gun, what could we do to maybe still move forward? And they're like, what if we tried to talk to this guy Josh who lived in Ukaipa, who sold Damien's brother the gun, and see what we can find out there. So police head to this guy Josh's house, and they, Josh opens the door and they're like, hello, we are the police. Question for you, Josh. Did you happen to sell a gun to Damien's brother? Please, can you give us this information? He's like, actually, yes, I did. About a year ago, I sold Damien's brother a .25 caliber pistol. And police's ears perk up because that's the caliber of the bullet casing that was found near Kelly's body. So they're like, okay, I know this was a year ago that you sold this, and it's probably a long shot, but did you happen to test fire it at any point? Because maybe we could get these casings or these bullets out of your yard or wherever you did this. We can compare it against a bullet we found. Bing, bang, boom. We can solve our case. And lucky for police, he had actually test fired this gun at his mother's house. So him and the police go over to his mother's house. They search this yard. They end up finding 3 bullet casings for a .25 caliber pistol. They tested against the bullet that was found at the scene of Kelly's murder, and it was a match. And if that wasn't bad enough, this is not the only bullet casing that was a match that was very, very damning. They actually found another bullet casing later when they were searching a house. They were searching Damien's house, and they found this bullet in Damien's jewelry box. So from there, police bring Kinsey in because they want to question her about the night that Kelly disappeared. And she has a totally different story to tell police than Damien. So what Kinsey says happened is that the night that Kelly disappeared, she didn't bail on her. She did meet up with her so they could go hiking. The two were hanging out and they decided to go to an area called the Ghost Town. And when they got there, they had plans to meet Damien. And Kelly thought they were just going to be hanging out. But Kinsey says what was actually going to happen is that her and Damien had been planning a prank for the last 2 weeks to scare Kelly. So what they said they were going to do, or what Kinsey said they were going to do, is take Kelly to a grave, a pre-dug shallow grave out in Ghost Town, because apparently Kelly was very afraid of graves, and they were just going to scare her like, this is where you could die. But Damien brought a gun, and this was not part of the plan, according to Kinsey. This whole situation is so horrifying for me to consider. She was so afraid of this place. A friend of hers, it was a guy, I believe his name was Austin, said that the two had been out there before, and she was so scared out there that she clung to him and made them leave after just 10 to 15 minutes. She couldn't even hang out there. And now there she is. Tiny, not even 100 pounds, 5'1", just this little girl next to this grave, right? To one side of her, there is a pre-dug grave, and to the other side of her is her best friend and this guy that she thought she loved with a gun. But before she found herself in this situation, it's just her and Kinsey, and they're hanging out at Ghost Town, and they're waiting. And they're waiting, and they're waiting, but Damien's actually late. He's 2 hours late. So Kinsey and Kelly were actually about to leave. They had gotten in the car, and they were driving away. They were about to leave. This wasn't going to happen. And then Damien showed up. The girls got out of the car, and they all decided to go for a walk. And they were walking in the direction of this pre-dug grave. Kinsey said that she and Damien took Kelly to the grave, and they started trying to scare her. Things were going according to plan when all of a sudden the gun that Damien was holding accidentally went off. This is what she said, that it wasn't a planned shot, it was an accidental shot, and that when it shot Kelly, it grazed her head, and she fell to the ground. She was moaning, she was making sounds. So Kinsey took the gun from Damien and walked over to Kelly and went to shoot her again, but the gun jammed. And once they were able to get the gun working again, she says that she shot Kelly in the head to put her out of her misery. So she just like literally walked up to this girl on the ground and shot her at point blank range. They then buried her in this hole. Damien picked her up and put her into the grave, and Kinsey started to bury her with her hands and feet, just pushing dirt on top of her. They smoothed the top of the grave with a shovel, right? Okay. A shovel that belonged to Kinsey's father that was still out there from a few days earlier when they had pre-dug this grave. And then they pulled that orange couch on top of it to try to conceal the grave that they had just filled with Kelly inside of it. They then left. Kinsey got into Kelly's car and drove it to Ontario Mills with Damien following behind her. They then abandoned the car. They changed their clothes because they brought changes of clothes, and they threw Kelly's car keys into a dumpster before going to Denny's and just having dinner, where Kinsey had a hickory burger with a salad and Damien had the French slam. Can you imagine just going and eating? That always makes me feel weird to just go and eat. I know you need to eat to like live, but I feel like I might not have an appetite after something like that, but then again, I've never murdered anybody, so maybe it does make you super hungry. I don't fucking know. After eating dinner, to help, solidify their alibi, they even took in a movie, a 9:20 movie, and they saw Once Upon a Time in Mexico. The two then went on trying to act like everything was normal, pretending to be sad, pretending to be looking for their friend, then once she was found, pretending to be heartbroken by her death. But they, when all was said and done, were not doing as well as they were hoping that they would be doing. They were kind of falling apart. Kinsey was feeling insecure in her friendship with Damien. She felt like it was ending, despite doing this thing together that should, in theory, bond them, I guess. I don't fucking know. They seem to be drifting apart. And instead of like looking at it being like, wow, we did something terrible, she's looking at it like, oh, Elodie is trying to keep us apart, which is so weird. Teenagers, I guess. And she said that Elodie hated her and was trying to ruin her friendship with Damien, and it was really affecting her mood. She'd go from being really happy and positive to being really bitchy, and it was just bad. She was going through clear like mood swings. And then Damien was like spiraling, actually. It seems like everything was kind of bursting out of the seams of him. I guess he even got in a fight with his girlfriend Elodie, and during this fight he had like a breakdown where he started like screaming and crying hysterically and like punched the garage door, and this was in front of her mother, and apparently he ended up even confessing to them. During like this whole like breakdown, he confessed. He told them what happened. He said it was an accident, that they didn't mean for it to happen. It was supposed to be a prank, and then she was dead, and that they put her in the hole even though they knew the grave wasn't even big enough, that they didn't plan this to happen. Otherwise they would have obviously dug a bigger grave, and that he just couldn't believe that this had happened. But don't feel too bad for him just because he had a hard time with murdering somebody, because it's like he did and he didn't, because he was also able to, push police in a different direction, just like Kinsey, giving them leads and putting like little breadcrumbs down in other people. I guess even at Kelly's memorial service, he mentioned to somebody that the person who sold his brother a gun had mentioned wanting to kill Kelly. So he was trying to like push people in other directions. And even the night after killing Kelly, it was said that he was acting super normal. The day after killing Kelly, he was acting super normal as he hung out with Elodie. Remember, he went to her house and spent a couple hours with her, stayed with her till 2 a.m. She said he was fine. The next day they got together, they hung out, they drove around, they went to Hollywood, and she said he was totally fine. She said he was, quote, acting normal, which means goofy and joking around. So, fuck him, and he's caught now anyway. Now, what's wild to me is that after Kinsey made this confession, they actually let her go. And I was like, why would they do that? And I think the reason they did that is because they had a confession from her, but not Damien, so they were hoping that, she'd maybe call him and they could catch it on, the phone or whatever. And that didn't end up happening, not with Damien, but she did confess again to somebody else. Like, she was really, like, coming apart at this point. I mean, she'd already told police she did this. She knew that things were falling down around her. And I guess she had actually called her boyfriend, Peter. Remember Peter? She called Peter and she told him what happened. She was like, listen, we fucked up. Me and Damien shot Kelly, which I can't imagine being that kid on the other end of that call. Because how could you imagine? I could never imagine. Even now my friend's doing something like that. But as a teenager, it's fucking crazy. And she told him that police had initially been looking into and had like arrested 2 other guys, and she thought they were going to get pinned for the murder, but now it was looking like she was going to get arrested, and she was freaking out. And what she didn't know is that Peter's phone was tapped at this time, so all of this was recorded. Kinsey also confessed to her mother, and she confessed to her mother while like a cop was in the room, so they were all together. And her mom asked her like, why did you shoot Kelly to put her out of her misery instead of just like calling and getting her help? And Kinsey's response was that her phone didn't have service, so she just had to do this. And her mom, in response to this confession, told her, like, you need to be put away. And then she was mad at the police for not arresting her right away and letting her, like, go home. She's like, why would you do this? Just take her to jail. Now, before the 2 were arrested, but after Kinsey had confessed, police go to Damien's house, and they tell him that Kinsey had confessed and had told them that he was involved. And his response to them was interesting. And he's like, it's silly is what it is. And I didn't know what to do with it, but I needed you guys to hear it because I was like, I think his brain is broken. He said to them, quote, "I don't want to answer any questions, and I am going to get up and walk into the house and take a nap." So he was either shutting down or he was just going to lay there and like stare at the wall, because who could nap when police come to your house and be like, "So we know you murdered a girl"? I don't know. I was just like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk into the house, and I'm going to take a nap. Anyways, shortly after all of this, Kinsey Nordman and Damien Guerrero were both arrested. Kinsey was arrested while she was driving down the road with her parents, and Damien was picked up at a movie theater. He was at the San Bernardino movie theater where he was seeing Matrix Revolutions. They were both charged with murder and with personal and intentional use of a firearm causing death, and the DA's office was also considering lying in wait, a special circumstances charge that would make the two of them eligible for the death penalty. And both of them were held on a $5 million bond. Now, it was a huge shock to everybody when Damien and Kinsey were revealed to be the killers, because police had been reporting from the very beginning that this was probably drug-related. Like, all of the earlier reporting say that it was possibly drug-related, and that somebody had been arrested who was known to deal drugs and was arrested on like an auto theft charge, and that these guys were the ones that were being looked in for the murder. So when all of a sudden they did this hard flip and they're like, actually, this wasn't drug-related, it was nothing like that, it was two of her high school friends who killed her, people were like, what the fuck? Because remember, English, there weren't murders in this area. The whole year before there hadn't been a murder, and Kelly's murder was the only one. So for her to be killed and it to be two other kids who did it, they were just like, what the hell? And the chief of police came out and said that it was because of a, quote, personal dispute, and then said of this quote, "They were friends, allegedly, though I hate to use that term." And Kelly's mom, man, she was just so heartbroken because she had seen these kids. She had known her daughter was around these kids, and just knowing that there had been a personal relationship there and that she had actually seen them together was devastating. It was just so surprising to people that these kids, and I say kids, they were like 18, 19, 20, I forget how old they were when they were finally arrested, around that range though. And it was just shocking that they did this because they had their whole lives ahead of them. So did Kelly. They all had their whole lives ahead of them. Damien was a psychology major at UC Riverside and a part-time receptionist. Kinsey was also working as a receptionist at the same company but another location. Like, these kids had everything ahead of them, and they had murdered Kelly, an 18-year-old girl who was their friend. Kinsey was supposedly her best friend, and she loved Damien, and she had the dream of being a writer or a psychologist, and they had literally stolen her future from her. The judge, who had been on the bench for 18 years, said that Kelly's murder was one of the most senseless and tragic cases they had ever seen. Now, legal. So the two were tried together. They had the same trial, but they had two separate juries, which I thought was very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that happening, and I don't really understand the logistics of such a choice. If you know more about that, please let me know down below. Like, are they both in the room at the same time? Do they switch out? Like, I don't know. I have never heard of this, but that's what happened. And both of them were little shits. They didn't show any remorse, and they both completely blamed each other for what happened. The defense went with what Kinsey said, that this was just a prank that went horribly wrong, that the gun was not supposed to go off, and it was clear that it was a joke because the grave that they had dug for Kelly was so incredibly small that nobody could take it seriously. Nobody would think that this was really premeditated. It was clearly a joke. In response to this, like, Diana, Kelly's mom, was pissed. She was like, how could you say this is a joke? This isn't a joke. She's dead. She's been murdered. She added that if Kinsey's story was true, that meant that Kelly was still alive and that they had every opportunity, she had every opportunity to stop what was happening and help Kelly, but she chose not to, and she chose to kill her instead. And what she did after killing her was just straight up evil, dude. Kinsey had helped Kelly's mother look for her missing daughter, even helping with a search that included 100 members of the U.S. Coast Guard, and they did a search by Ontario Mills, where Kinsey had dumped Kelly's car with Damien. She stuck up posters and participated in search groups, and she also tried to derail the investigation by pointing police in the direction of those local drug dealers and trying to frame people who were not involved to keep suspicion off of her and Damien. And because she was Kelly's best friend, she was a shoulder to cry on for Diana, for Kelly's mother, especially in like the first week after she disappeared. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's just like in the Skylar Neese case. Any person who can sit there and console a grieving family, a grieving mother whose child is missing, who you murdered, and you can act normal and console them and like give them comfort, is an evil piece of shit. Like, that's a different level of evil. Because how could you sit there and know that you're causing this pain and like try to comfort them? It's so disgusting. Now, Kinsey did speak to the court. She read from a 3-page statement where she basically said that she knew that there was no excuse for what she did, but that she knew in her heart of hearts that she never actually meant to hurt Kelly and would do anything to bring her back. But in the end, Kinsey was convicted of first-degree murder and discharging a handgun during a murder on March 9th, 2005, and she was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison and ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $39,000. And the sentencing also said that she would not be eligible for parole until she served at least 44 of those 45. Now, Damien, you know how they had the same trial. So during his trial, his jury actually deadlocked, which surprised me, but they did. They deadlocked. 11 of the jurors were like, he sucks, throw him in jail, throw away the key. But one juror was like, I feel differently than you guys. So because they all didn't agree, the judge actually declared a mistrial. So they were going to have to go through this whole thing all over again and give him his own, like separate trial. But then to avoid trial, Damien Guerrero, who's 23 at this time, by the time this happened, he actually took a plea deal where he would be pleading guilty to second-degree murder. So the plea deal was made, and now he was just going to have to be sentenced. And it was during his sentencing hearing that he finally cried. Like, during the trial, he didn't really show remorse or anything, but when he was being sentenced, when he was being punished, that's when he finally cried. And it was very impactful. There were like these giant photos of Kelly, one in her graduation cap and gown that was on one side of him, one of her with her horse Banner, I believe, Banner? A horse. One with her horse on the other side of her, and then in the center there was like a montage, what is it called? A slideshow of different photos of her, starting from when she was like a baby, going all the way through to her 18, from when she was 18, when she was killed, which is just like, to see her whole life that he ended. I cannot even imagine how. I hope that he cared. You know what I mean? I hope that it hurt like hell. Because, man, like, not only did you end this girl's life in the very beginning, but you destroyed her mother. You destroyed her family. I cannot imagine being her mom, to have her baby, her only child, killed. Like, it just destroys me. And her mom said something that completely broke my heart. I'm gonna cry. No, I'm not. Stop it. She said something that completely broke my heart when she said of her daughter, quote, I planned everything for her, around her, with her, just so she has a better life. What do I do now? I expect her to come home from school. I see her picture, and I'm not ever going to see her again. My heart's been ripped out. Kelly's grandmother, Dolores, also spoke, and she was just completely heartbroken during the sentencing hearing. She was heartbroken the whole time, but you could see her during the sentencing hearing just completely devastated. And she said of Kelly, quote, she was my only grandchild, and I will never have the happiness of seeing her dreams materialize. Kelly's grandfather also spoke, and he too broke my heart. Like, I include quotes from family members so that you can see just how real this is. It's not just a story. This is somebody's life, okay? And what happened here, Kelly being killed, changed so many people's lives and devastated so many people. What you do doesn't just affect you. It doesn't just affect the person you're doing it to. There's a ripple effect, and that's something I always like to illustrate. And that's why I always talk about the families and how hard this destroys the families, because I can't not imagine being in their place. And her grandfather broke my heart. This older man who had one grandchild, as far as I know, unless, there was marriage or whatever, but had one grandchild, one granddaughter, who's now gone. This little girl who he loved so much, who he bought riding lessons for and, changed the trajectory of her life because she loved horses so much. Now she's gone, and he doesn't get to see her grow up. And he said specifically this quote, I will never have a chance to see her in her wedding dress, dance with her at her wedding, hold her children on my lap as I did when she was a little one. That part of the future will never exist. Now, before Damien was sentenced, he had a chance to address the court, and he chose to do so, and he used this opportunity to apologize to Kelly's family, and he said to them, I have wanted to tell Kelly how very sorry I am for what happened to her that night. It is my hope that by expressing my feelings publicly to you, I will be able to convey to Kelly's mother and loved ones in a very gentle way the depth and sincerity of my feeling. Ultimately, Damien Guerrero was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, and he was given credit for the 5 years that he had already served. I just feel so bad, man. I feel so bad for her family. I feel so bad for her mother. I know that this weighed very heavy on her mother, not just that her daughter had been killed, but also that she wasn't there with her when it happened, that she wasn't home. Their last communication was by email. She had emailed Kelly, I believe it was the morning she was killed, And she had then wrote her again in the evening, super excited to tell her about something that had happened at work, but then she didn't receive a response. And she just says she wished she had been here. She wished she had been here after she disappeared, not because she feels like she could have stopped what happened, because she doesn't, or like, I don't think she does, but she said that she just knows that she could have found her sooner, that she could have gone out, she could have helped look for her, and she feels like she could have found her sooner instead of her just laying out there in that grave for weeks by herself. She said after Kelly was gone, all she had left was to think about what could have been but never will be, like where her daughter's writing would have taken her, where her future would have ended up, how her future would have ended up playing out, or what her grandkids. Now, as I said, Damien was given 15 years to life, and those 15 years have come and gone. So Damien has been up for parole. And the first time he came up for parole, immediately people were like, absolutely not. They were pissed. And a petition was made for people to sign to like get the parole board to not let him out. They were like, listen, Damien is the one who brought the gun. Damien is the one who dug the grave. Damien is the one who brought an extra pair of clothes with him in case he got blood on his clothes. Damien attended the memorial services and pretended to be upset. Damien helped pass out missing persons flyers, and Damien helped construct a memorial for Kelly that was on the site where she was murdered. Because yeah, I didn't mention this, but a memorial was built for Kelly near where her body was found. And this was a group of her friends who did this that included Damien and Kinsey. There are these large rocks that are painted purple and then have, Kelly's name written across them. And there was a photo of her. It was actually like a group photo that Kinsey used to be in, but somebody went and cut her face out of it. And it had like lyrics to her favorite songs, like painted on the rocks. And then a message that said, quote, "Sorry I couldn't protect you." And another thing that said, "I would have died for you." And this was signed, "With love," by Kinsey Nordman. I know, it's sick. But anyways, this petition ended up getting like 2,300 signatures, and it gave the people instructions on how to quickly email like the parole board to get them to stop this from happening. But despite that, in 2019, a 35-year-old Damien Guerrero was granted parole. So everybody was like, holy shit, this guy's really gonna get out. But then Gavin Newsom, the governor? Yeah, California. I should know this, I live in California. Governor, mayor, politics. He reversed this decision and was like, actually, I'm the big boss and you're not gonna get out. But he was granted parole, and then Gavin Newsom put a stop to it. Gavin Newsom basically said that Damien had lured Kelly to her death, making her believe that she was meeting her close friends, and then after killing her, allowed her family to search in vain. And he added that Damien's, quote, explanation for his willingness to participate in this crime continued to be inadequate, end quote. And that's because Damien had said that basically the reason he did this is because he was in a codependent relationship with Kinsey, and he felt that their relationship was falling apart, and since he was scared to lose her, he did whatever he could to keep her. Like, he would do anything to maintain that friendship, even killing a girl, which is just ridiculous. And Damien also said that once he got there, once him and Kelly and Kinsey were together at the spot where they ended up killing her, that Kelly was sort of picking on him, started making fun of him for like him being there and hanging out with her, even though Elodie said he couldn't, like she was kind of like poking fun at him. And Gavin Newsom brought this up too and was like, listen, there was a relationship, a physical and emotional, a sexual relationship between Kelly and Damien has continued to downplay this, that it existed, A, and that it had something to do with what happened here, B. Gavin Newsom basically said that until Damien could adequately explain like what inside of him made him do something this horrible, that he didn't believe Damien could safely be released back into the public. His next parole hearing was scheduled for April of 2021, and it too was rejected. But then, this year, in 2023, after 3 unsuccessful attempts at being given parole, a now 38-year-old Damien Matthew Guerrero was granted parole. Dozens of family and friends of Kelly's came out and begged for this not to happen, but it was decided that yes, just 2 months shy of the 20th anniversary of Kelly's murder, Damien walked free. Damien said that while in prison, he overcame a sense of entitlement that he felt in his youth and came to learn empathy. He said that he worked on the core issues that drove him to commit such a crime and expressed his remorse by writing letters to Kelly's grandfather and donates his, quote, works of art to a horse sanctuary in San Diego because he knows that Kelly loved horses. And by the time this happened, by the time that Damien was released, Kelly's mother, Diana, had actually passed away. She passed away in February of 2014. She was cremated and she shares a headstone with her daughter. So I guess the one no, I don't want to say good thing, because somebody being dead isn't a good thing, but the one, what is the word I'm looking for? At least she didn't have to be alive to see one of her daughter's murderers walk free. That's what I'm trying to say, but I'm not doing so eloquently. Do I say anything eloquently? I don't think so. Dolores, Kelly's grandmother, and Diana's mother said that because of Damien, she now has no one. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "My granddaughter and my daughter were all I had. He murdered Kelly, and then my daughter died of a broken heart. My daughter Diana said, quote, I have nothing to live for anymore, end quote. After he murdered Kelly, he destroyed my family. He's a hate-filled monster." Kelly's grandfather said that because of Damien, he has no more kids and he has no more grandkids. He said that Damien Guerrero took his entire family when he killed Kelly. He said that, like, you're not supposed to outlive your grandchildren. Your grandchildren are not supposed to leave this earth before you do. And that it left a void in his life, in her grandmother's life, that simply cannot be filled. And then he called this, and I thought this was worded so perfectly, he called it a, quote, cruel reversal of what is expected in life. And that's absolutely what it is. That's not how things are supposed to be. You're not supposed to see your kids leave this world. It's such a fucked up thing. That's why there's not even a word for it. There's words for losing your spouse. There's words for losing your parents. There is not a term for a parent losing their children. And I've quoted this before, and it's from 6 Feet Under, and it says that, like, that's too fucked up for there even to be a word. And then for her to die so young, to be murdered in such a brutal way at such a young age, and by two people that were supposed to be her close friends. Like, what? You can't even trust your kids' friends now. It's just like Diana, Kelly's mother, said during the first trial, when she said, and I quote, "No parent should ever outlive their children. No parent should have to sit in a courtroom with the murderer of their child claiming innocence. No parent should fear their children's friends." And with that, my friends, is the story of the tragic murder of 18-year-old Kelly Bullwinkle. I hope you found my telling of it to be informative and made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Kelly with me today. And now that I've gone through all the details of this case, I want to revisit the question of the day. I actually had two, and they were these. These are the questions. 1, do you believe what Kinsey and Damien said, that this was actually a prank that just went horribly wrong and they freaked out and they did what they did? That's the first question. And 2, how do you feel knowing that Damien is walking free in the earth right now? Walking free on the earth right now. He's out there. He's living his life. He is free after what he did. And I just want to know what you guys think about that. Because I know it's supposed to be about rehabilitation, right? Like, that's what we say. But really, a lot of the times we're just like, how about instead of that, we lock them up forever? And I just want to know what your opinion is on that. And I don't know how I feel. It's weird to think that he's out there. It's weird to think that he could be watching this. I don't know if he would. If you are, weird. But it's just like such a crazy thing to think that somebody could do this and then just be out there. I don't know. I was going to say something about my friends, but I'm not going to. But anyways, let me know what you think down below. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below of any cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. I often have people asking, like, how do I suggest a case? Here in the comments. I don't really take case suggestions from Instagram because it's like my one place where I'm trying not to think about things that are sad, like death. I don't really do, like, you're not supposed to use my email for that. That's just for, like, work and stuff. So anyway, anytime you want to suggest a case, just leave it in the comments here. I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a case suggestion, I put your name on the list next to it. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out, like this case with Delaney, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I'm having trouble right now. It's very early. Like, I started filming this video last night, and then I had to stop, and now I'm refilming it today. So you may notice, or you may not, that at one point it switches from one day to the other, but I did my makeup the same and I put on the same shirt. Let me know, comment down below if you can find the moment where it switches. I'm curious if you can tell. But anyways, if you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership where you can get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.